what we're going to do now is Helen Katz is going to come up, SVP, Director, Global Analytics and Insights at Publicis. And we're going to have a very interesting discussion about everything that's happening with the changing world of TV measurement, given addressability and sort of the impact, what that does to Nielsen C3 ratings in national. So come on up and bring your panel.
Thank you. Oops. No, I know. That's fine.
Do you have the order you want us to be in?
I'll go at the end. 1, 2, 3.
Right. I'm in the middle.
Yes. Well, thank you. I think some of the topics that were covered at the end of the last panel lead very nicely into this one, and when we're talking about the future of TV measurement. And I'm just going to, in the interest of time, everyone, if you can just introduce themselves and say who they are and where they come from, or which company they come from.
Radha Subramanyam, Chief Analytics Officer for CBS.
Brian Hughes, I lead audience intelligence and strategy for MAGNA, and man, those lights are hot.
Ziangas, Senior Vice President of Research and Insights at AMC Networks.
Great. So when we put this panel together, we wanted to focus on different efforts that are going on in terms of changing or coming up with new ways to measure television viewing, particularly with in the area of addressable TV. And I thought it would be good to start with an initiative called Project OR and give everybody a little background on that, because that is a relatively new 6-month-old initiative to try and create a new type of measurement in the addressable space. And then there's another one that's out there, which we'll also talk about from Nielsen, who put together an addressable TV task force. So, with luck, there we go. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview in case you're not aware of who or what Project OR is. You can see it stands for Open, Addressable, and Ready. And it's a consortium that was initiated by Vizio and Inscape, owner of Inscape, to bring together the ecosystem to talk about addressable TV opportunities and, in particular, measurement. So there are 18 companies at this point represented, and the whole group gets together every 6 or 8 weeks. And one of the things that we focused on in this group was to create what we called initially a measurement spec. And really, it was as it moved along, it became more of a measurement nirvana or guidelines for what we really want in a measurement system. And so that was initiated last June and was completed at the end of last year. And the idea is to lay out the guidelines in order to have a measurement system that is ready for the 21st century for addressable advertising. And it really is the idea of ideal requirements as opposed to do we have to keep doing what we're doing right now, and how can we get to where we need to be, and like I said, sort of an aspirational roadmap. So some of the highlights are some principles: that it should be open and non-proprietary, that the measurement should be at the impression level. As several people have talked about in earlier panels today, we want to make sure that we capture and separate both ads and content. This measurement system needs to link to other data sets or allow for that. And of course, it needs to protect privacy. So it should also, the guidelines talk about having an event-level video delivery, identity match capabilities, and deduplication across media. So that is really kind of Project OR measurement guidelines in a nutshell. And now what I wanted to do is turn it over and ask the panelists what their involvement has been with Project OR and their reaction to what both Project OR and Nielsen have been doing in trying to create new approaches to measurement. So I'm going to start with Radha, and then we'll continue the discussion.
Hi, guys. Good to see you all, even though I can't really see you, given the lights and so on. So obviously a very interesting topic. Thanks, Jane. Thank you, Helen, for setting this up. We are super excited about addressable, right? Because we think TV, sight, sound, motion, great storytelling is exciting enough to begin with. And then when you make it even more data ready than it's today, and you get all this data back, it's obviously very exciting. And we've been involved in the addressable world for a good few years now. I think Mike Dean, again, is somewhere in the background, who heads up many of our addressable efforts. And just a plug for Mike and his team, we were the first broadcaster to pilot live linear addressables. So again, we obviously believe in this, right? So we have been very involved with Project OR. We're very deeply involved with Nielsen. And there are both similarities and differences, right? I think what we all agree is, while we don't have an answer today, we all agree that just like with the WFA and principles overall around advertising measurement, we need principles around addressability and addressable measurement. And I think both Project OR and Nielsen take slightly different swipes at this, but I don't believe in any means contradictory, right? So having spent far more time than I care to admit reading these different specs, the principles of OR around privacy, around openness, around video, no one's going to disagree with, right? We agree. It's not just nirvana, but really something we should all be doing.
Yep.
And then Nielsen, just in the past couple of weeks, put out different guidelines, but they were, again, to me, very detailed and good tech specs about how to participate. So what I'm taking away from this today is there's a lot of energy and momentum and interest in figuring out measurement of addressable campaigns and addressable impressions and how to fit them into the larger ecosystem of impressions. And they're guiding principles for sure, but we're far, far, far from any industry-wide solution that specifically says, yes, this is how addressable impressions are measured, this is exactly how they're carved out. But what I'm seeing is a lot of positive momentum around being willing to engage with these questions.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the two most important things I see are from both Project OR and Nielsen is that they're designed, as Radha said, to have sort of specs and dimensions around how we do this. But I think the idea at the end of the day is that anybody can play, so anybody can kind of put data into the system and enable measurement after the fact. So I think that's obviously a big undertaking, but very important. And I think the other thing that I'm encouraged by is that, one of the things I've been saying forever is that, we've spent a lot of time trying to sort of retrofit digital video into a TV paradigm, and this sort of the whole addressable movement in television is going to kind of force us to finally make TV more like digital instead of the other way around. And so I think that's a good direction to be going in.
Yeah, I think what the exciting part about this is, I would say, starting this business where I started out on the cable side of the business, then you have the broadcasters. I think it was very much going at each other. Things have been so much more collaborative, I would say, over the past several years, because I think we all understand these are issues that affect all of us, whether it's a broadcast network, cable networks, any way you kind of split on how content is being made available. And again, I think what we just need to do is provide what we believe the value of our audience is and how you put ads in front of those folks, to happen sooner rather than later, but also just be able to get all the right people in the room to discuss what those issues are and try to make a solve for it. So again, I think, I think we're all involved with what OR is doing, what Nielsen is doing with AVA, and I would say there's probably more similarities than not. And I would say, I think as long as you put the right people in the room to try and figure these things out, we'll get to that place. Again, and I agree with Radha too. I wish it was a bit more short term that these things will happen, but they are really, really complicated, and it's going to take a little time for us to figure this out.
So Brian, do you think that the arrival of addressability will move the TV industry to transact on impression level currency?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It's something we've been doing in local TV now for several years already. So, and we've seen a lot of movement from both the sell and buy side on kind of joining us on that front. So, it would be great to see national kind of go that direction too. And I think it makes sense if we're talking about joining audiences across platforms to just have the same sort of level of counting, if you will.
So I just want to clarify this a little bit, because at least from where we sit, we already transact almost entirely on impressions. Other than a few holdouts for legacy reasons and sports and so on, we are almost all completely in national and impressions business. I think the difference is it's not always targeted impressions, and over the course of time we'll have to see how much remains mass versus how much remains targeted. But I don't think there's any mega pushback around impressions at all.
Right, and again, if you think about it, and I know we discussed this, it's You know, how are we transacting today, right? You have an age-sex demo, which is really, we're still basing it impression-based. Data-driven linear, again, I think we're looking at advanced targets in the traditional linear space and being able to provide impressions across those specific targets. And again, I think this is just another layer of actually getting a little deeper one-to-one with the consumer on it. So it all makes sense as we kind of move forward. I wish we could move faster. I think we have opportunities to do things now today in those other forms, and especially data-driven linear. But again, I understand what the promise of, what we're trying to do on the addressable side here. And again, I think we're setting the foundation for getting this done from learning from the other things that we have done in the past.
So let's switch and talk about what the Nielsen's approach, or what Nielsen has released in its addressable measurement. It's not a guideline, but it's their proposal, I guess. And so one of the things that they have proposed in their approach is to separate out the addressable, separately measure addressable versus non-addressable spots. So I'm interested to hear your opinions on whether you think that is the right path forward.
So both Tom and I spent at least 4 hours with them yesterday.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And I personally have spent at least 10 hours with them this week on this topic alone, right? And I think Nielsen, and I think there may be Nielsen people in the room, will concur that they are not taking a stance on anything yet, right? Because even something simple like backing out addressable is not like that. It's not like there's a pile of candy and one of them is red and you can take out that red piece, right?
It sounds
Because
simple when you
it
just
sounds
yes,
simple.
right.
So I think what there's consensus on is, you both need to see the total potential impressions and potentially the addressable impressions as well. But in terms of methodology, there's at least 3 completely distinct ways of getting there, maybe more. And I don't think there's no consensus or even a strong point of view on which one of these is right. But what I really like about the conversations we're having, and this is to your point about collaboration, right? They're very different from conversations we had a few years ago where cable would be yelling at broadcast, would be yelling at the agency, and and we wouldn't even invite the client into the room, right? So all those dynamics are gone. Like none of those exist anymore. It was much more here are all the different things we need to solve for. Here are some different points of view. But I actually liked Tom yesterday. No one was digging in and saying this is the way it has to be done.
No, I think a lot of this is just all very new to us. I think we all, the brain power in that room, again, on the client side and the Nielsen side, I think it's very tough to kind of match. And I think when you look at what Nielsen is kind of putting on the table, or again, what OR may be putting on the table, they're putting that in front of us. And I think, it needs to pass, the certain litmus test. Does this make sense? And it's not just that it just makes sense. I think Nielsen and what we're doing in OR2, they're going to need to show with real data how these things work, and again, does it make sense? And I think it is iterative. We'll figure things out. We'll say, yep, this works. No, this doesn't work. But in the end, as you kind of go through it, it's the right way of doing it. Because I think if you isolate yourself and you think you have the answer, you don't belong in the room.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that they've been very open about the different ways that approach us. The only sort of drum I tend to beat, and any of our media partners that are here today will, I've been irritating them about this for a couple of years now, is moving away from the C3 average commercial minute paradigm to at least exact minute, which is, better than what we have today.
Yep. And so the other
That's
element.
going to happen soon. I don't know when, but soon.
Holding you to
So
the
we
house.
keep arguing, this is one of those, we keep having these arguments on stage, and I think we all know that currency measurement will evolve and get better, but exactly what that thing is, there's no consensus on.
Right. And one of the other elements about the Nielsen's approach is with the addressable linear addressable is that they will be the ad server for dynamic ad insertion in smart TVs. That's what's being tested, as well as the measurement provider. And so for some people, that can be seen as a potential conflict because they haven't served in both those roles simultaneously. And for others, it's like this is how it has to be in order to be effective. So again, throwing it out there as to what
Yeah,
you feel about
look,
it.
I think as long as you're transparent in what you're doing and you're opening up whatever that black box may be so we understand what's going on, I'm for it. I actually, in a way, the way, again, Nielsen has been doing this, right? You know, they acquired Grace Note, and then they found a pretty cool technology company that we worked with, Sorensen Media, and did tests and to see if these things work. And they did work on the test that we did here. So they have the ACR, they have this great ad tech in there, and I think it allows then Nielsen to really understand from beginning to end what needs to happen, right? So again, I would say, is it like grading your homework? It could be, but as long as we're all there watching someone grade that homework and they're grading it the right way, I'm okay with it.
So just to build on that, right? So it's a free country. Like, no one can tell anyone else what. You can barely tell your children what to do, right? I can't even tell my dog what to do. So it's a free country. We can't dictate other companies' business strategies and tell them you can be in this business, you cannot be. It's just not how the world operates. And by the way, all of us become at the same time, a little bit of media company, a little bit of measurement company, a little bit of, even agency in some cases. So everyone's business models are not your kind of agency, it's a different kind, making creative stuff for clients. So in a way, boundaries have evolved a lot in this world, right? At the same time, the devil's in the details, as they say, and I think Tom is a little more comfortable with the grading your own homework than I am. And we'd have to see, is it like an agency where you build these walls? Is it like a consulting company, an auditor, where the people who look at this don't look at that other? What are the checks and balances that are going to be put in place, not just for us, but ultimately, this is the kind of thing that always ends up in front of Congress or the FTC or someone else, right? So I think, again, a lot of the devil is in the details. It's still early innings, and we just have to see how it unfolds.
And with Project OR, their approach is to issue a spec or a RFI to multiple providers, and to your point, the industry would still want the transparency on how those providers would respond on delivering on the measurement. Yeah. So, yeah. So the other element that's critical with addressable is who you're targeting and defining audience segments. And we had quite a lot of conversation earlier on today about that. But when do you think we will see, or how soon do you think we will see standardization of the audience segments, which are really critical to making addressable fully scaled?
Yeah, look, again, those are things that we've kind of done with, players in this space, right? So Clipped took a leadership role on data-driven linear to kind of put out some standards there, Advanced Target Standards Group, ATSG. So I think standards are good. I think being able to provide levels of what those standard targets are good. But what I realize as we do business like this, for the most part, they're very custom to first-party or third-party data that the client requires. So it's nice to have standards, but we're going to be outside the boundary of those standards based upon what the client is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this when we were sort of doing our prep call, but I think the standardization is really coming on our end because we want to be able to have the same targets for our specific targets for our clients that we can use across the entire pool of inventory, and that's where you see things like OpenAP come in with an effort to kind of standardize the way that you apply those targets across inventory pools, and that's kind of what I think of when I think of standardization.
Right. I think it's always going to land somewhere in the middle, right? You're going to have standardization around some things. I mean, people in market for Tesla Y can be defined pretty clearly, as can a new mom of twins. We could agree on how long new mom goes, whether it's 6 weeks or 6 years, right? But we could have standardization. But at the same time, every client has, and I speak as a marketer as much as a media company, I have my own proprietary segments that I need to activate against in the marketplace. And so that's going to live in a different pool out there. So we're encouraged by efforts like OpenAP to have a degree of standardization, and I think the world is going to hopefully adopt, instead of those 700, maybe we can align around 200 definitions we all agree on, and then we can all have the freedom to do what we need to do to move our businesses forward.
So one of the statements that I liked from the earlier panel was there are no goalposts anymore, right? we talked about, Jane, I think that in the introduction said we're changing the goalposts or moving the goalposts, and then I believe it was Jenny said that there is no goalpost. So where is the goalpost for addressable? Is there one, or what, if you had to look out 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, are we going to reach the goal, or is this?
Well, we're looking at you, Brian.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry. I mean, obviously, I mean, I think a good goal in the sort of short to mid-term would be, right now when we do addressable, we tend to do it with a specific partner and it's within their own footprint. So I think the efforts that Orr and Nielsen are making to be able to do that at a greater scale is a good next step. So to be able to do addressable at a much greater scale than we can within a single footprint, as it were, I think that's a good sort of, short to mid-term goal. Theoretically, and it's a little bit sort of TBD in terms of how this rolls out and how functional the technology becomes. But if we're thinking about something like ATSC 3.0, theoretically all TV could be addressable at some point. I don't know what the time horizon is on that, but I think the sort of, if we have to say there's a goalpost, the near-term goalpost would be more addressable at scale. I think everybody wants to get there.
So I don't want to have a number, right? X% should be addressable because who knows how the world evolves. I think more addressable, yes, I think we can all agree on that. I want to think about it differently, and I think P&G said this earlier. I want a better consumer experience. I think without great consumer experience, we're all kind of in a even deeper hole than we think we are. So I think about consumer experience, and I think of transparency. And I think those are great goals to strive for. And I worry less about X% addressable in the next 18 months or so.
I think that's a great point as far as the consumer experience. And I think we believe that, on the periphery, all these things, whether it's addressable and what we may be doing with other things too, in regard to that consumer experience. But I think a lot of times too, I think sometimes we just need to look at what's closest to us, right? Our traditional business, what do we do to make that consumer experience really good? And again, I think the reason why people shift to other platforms is they enjoy that experience better. You talk to my 25-year-old, my 20-year-old, their experiences are very different on how they consume media and what's easy for them. And I just love it when my kids say, there are too many commercials on television. I said, you better shut up. I go, that's what's paying your college bill. So again, no, but it's true. But as you kind of look at it, there are certain things that we're used to. Growing up as a kid watching television in the 70s and the 80s, you're used to certain things. My kid's going to be used to things very differently. That you can watch a whole season of programming over the course of 2 days. So again, I really like exactly what Radha said is, what do we need to do to improve the consumer experience? And I just wouldn't say in addressable, I say everywhere we make content and video available.
Yeah, I mean, we've done, we haven't done it for TV yet, but we've done a lot of studies for mobile, for example, personalized ad experiences. How do people react to it? Do they find it creepy? Do they like it? And by and large, people prefer it to sort of a more generalized ad approach. The most recent one that we did with Verizon Media, we even asked people like, who said I don't want my data used for personalizing advertising, but then when we serve them a personalized ad, we're like, yeah, I like this better. So, I think
sometimes they don't know what they want to.
But I think the long story short is the more addressable will sort of amount to a better consumer experience organically.
Does anyone have any questions? No? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.